The Philadelphia skyline burned gold against the November morning. 43 floors above street level, inside the executive boardroom of Harrington Holdings, the air smelled of fresh coffee, polished mahogany, and quiet ambition. Vivian Harrington stood at the head of the long conference table. She was 45 years old. Silver threads wove through her dark auburn hair, which she wore pulled back in a sleek chignon. Her charcoal Armani suit fit her like armor. Her posture was impeccable. Her voice was steady, measured, commanding. She had built this empire from nothing. 10 years ago, she had been a widow with a mountain of debt and a name that meant nothing to anyone. Her husband, Richard, had died in a car accident on the Schuylkill Expressway, leaving behind unpaid loans, a failing import business, and a life insurance policy that barely covered the funeral. Vivian had been 35 years old. She had no children, no family to fall back on, no safety net. What she had was rage. Rage at the unfairness of it all. Rage at the bankers who had called to collect debts before her husband's body was cold. Rage at the business partners who had abandoned her. Rage at a world that seemed determined to bury her alongside the man she had loved. She had taken that rage and forged it into something else entirely. In 10 years, Vivian Harrington had transformed a failing import company into one of the largest logistics and real estate conglomerates on the East Coast. Harrington Holdings now employed over 12,000 people. Its annual revenue exceeded $4 billion. Forbes had featured her on their cover twice. She had earned every single dollar. She had sacrificed everything for it. And now, on this ordinary November morning, she stood before her board of directors presenting the quarterly earnings report, completely unaware that she had exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds left to live. The boardroom was silent except for her voice. 12 executives sat around the table. Men and women in suits that cost more than most Americans earned in a month. They watched her with expressions carefully calibrated to convey respect, attention, and just the right amount of deference. Harrison Cromwell sat closest to her right hand. He was 58 years old. Silver hair swept back from a high forehead. A face that had been handsome once now hardened into something cold and calculating. He had been the company's chief financial officer for 7 years. Harrison listened to Vivian speak, but his eyes were elsewhere. They flickered to the presentation slides, to the numbers on the screen, to the woman who controlled everything he wanted. His expression never changed, but deep inside his chest, something dark and patient was waiting. Vivian clicked to the next slide. Our logistics division exceeded projections by 14%, she said. The new distribution center in Newark is now fully operational. We're looking at a 20% reduction in East Coast shipping times by Q2. She paused. Something felt wrong. It was subtle at first, a tightness in her chest, a flutter beneath her ribs. She had felt it before, usually after too much coffee or too little sleep. She ignored it. She always ignored it. Moving forward, I want to discuss our expansion into the Midwest market. The acquisition of the Kendrick Warehouse network has given us a significant foothold in. The tightness became pressure. The pressure became pain. Vivian's hand rose to her chest without her permission. Her fingers pressed against the silk of her blouse, against the bone beneath, against the muscle that was suddenly terrifyingly refusing to cooperate. She stopped speaking. The silence that followed was absolute. 12 pairs of eyes stared at her. "Ms. Harrington," someone asked, "are you all right?" Vivian tried to speak. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The pain in her chest had become a vice, crushing, relentless, stealing her breath and her voice and her thoughts all at once. The room began to tilt. The faces around the table blurred into smears of color and shadow. And then Vivian Harrington, the woman who had built an empire from nothing, collapsed onto the cold marble floor of her own boardroom. For a moment, no one moved. The executives sat frozen in their leather chairs, staring at the woman who had commanded them just seconds ago. She lay on her side, one arm twisted beneath her, her face turning a color that no living face should ever be. Gray, then blue, then purple. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Someone else said, "Is she breathing?" Harrison Cromwell rose slowly from his chair. His face was pale, but his movements were deliberate, controlled. He looked down at Vivian's body the way a man might look at a problem to be solved. "Call security," he said, "and get medical up here, now." But he did not kneel. He did not reach for her. None of them did. The 12 most powerful people in the room stood in a loose circle around their dying CEO, and not one of them moved to help her. They were afraid, not of death, not of losing her. They were afraid of liability, of lawsuits, of the headlines that might follow if they touched her wrong, moved her wrong, did anything that could later be called negligent or reckless or inappropriate. In the calculus of corporate survival, hesitation had become the safest choice. And so Vivian Harrington lay dying on Italian marble, surrounded by people who owed her everything, while the seconds ticked away like drops of blood. Outside the boardroom in the corridor that serviced the executive floor, a man named Garrett Brennan was mopping the floor. He was 34 years old, tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of hard work and harder years. His hands were rough from chemicals and labor. His gray uniform bore the logo of the building's cleaning service. He had been a janitor at Harrington Holdings for 3 months. For that, he had worked at a hospital in West Philadelphia, cleaning operating rooms and emergency wards. Before that, he had delivered packages for a shipping company that went bankrupt. Before that, he had spent 1 year in community college studying nursing before his mother got sick, and he had to drop out to take care of her. She had died anyway. That was 6 years ago. Now, Garrett lived in a 2-room apartment in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. He shared that apartment with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, and their 68-year-old neighbor, Margaret Sullivan, who watched Lily while Garrett worked the night shift. He had been behind on rent for 2 months. The electric company had sent a final notice yesterday. He had exactly $47 in his bank account. But this morning, pushing his mop across the polished floors of the 43rd floor, Garrett Brennan was thinking about none of these things. He was thinking about Lily. She had a school play coming up. She was going to be a butterfly. She had been practicing her lines for weeks, and last night she had finally gotten them perfect. And her smile when she finished had been so bright that Garrett had felt his heart crack open with love and pride and terror. Terror because he did not know how he was going to buy her the costume she needed. Terror because he did not know how he was going to keep the lights on. Terror because he was 34 years old and he had nothing to show for it except a daughter who deserved better than anything he could give her. He pushed the mop back and forth. The rhythm was soothing, and then he heard the screaming. Garrett's head snapped up. The sound was coming from the boardroom at the end of the hall. The glass doors were closed, but he could see movement inside. Shadows scrambling, bodies shifting. Someone screamed again. "She's not breathing." Garrett dropped the mop. It clattered against the marble floor, the sound sharp and final, and then he was running. His worn sneakers squeaked against the polished surface. His heart hammered in his chest. He reached the boardroom doors and pushed them open. The scene inside stopped him cold. A woman lay on the floor in the center of the room. She was wearing an expensive suit. Her face was the color of ash, her lips turning blue, her chest completely still. Around her stood a circle of executives, their faces pale, their hands empty, their mouths opening and closing like fish pulled from water. No one was helping her. No one was even touching her. Garrett's mind flashed back 5 years to a community center in West Philadelphia, a free CPR class. He had taken it because they were giving out food vouchers, and Lily had been hungry, and he would have sat through anything for those vouchers. The instructor had been a retired paramedic with kind eyes and a voice like gravel. "If they're not breathing," the man had said, "you are their lungs. If their heart has stopped, you are their heartbeat. You don't wait. You don't hesitate. You act. Because every second you waste is a second closer to brain damage, to death, to a life that can never be saved." Garrett had never forgotten those words. He had never thought he would need them. Until now. He pushed forward into the room. "What are you doing?" someone shouted. "You can't be in here." "Get out," another voice barked. "This is a private meeting." Garrett ignored them. He dropped to his knees beside the woman. Her eyes were half open, glazed, seeing nothing. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. Nothing. "Ma'am," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. Garrett tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and leaned down. He sealed his mouth over hers and breathed. Once. Twice. He watched her chest rise and fall. "What the hell is he doing?" someone shrieked. "Is he kissing her?" "Get him off her, security." "Someone call security." Garrett ignored the voices. He interlaced his fingers over her sternum and began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. His arms burned with the effort. His back ached from the angle, but he kept counting, kept pressing, kept fighting. "You filthy janitor," a voice snarled behind him. "Don't you dare touch her." Something struck him hard across the back. The pain was sharp, explosive. It felt like a bat or a cane or something hard and heavy swung with deliberate force. Garrett grunted, his vision blurring, but he did not stop. He could not stop. 15, 16, 17. Another blow landed on his shoulder. He heard bone creak, felt fire race down his arm. Someone was trying to pull him away, hands clawing at his uniform, voices screaming in his ears. But Garrett Brennan had spent his whole life being pushed around, being overlooked, being told he was not good enough, not smart enough, not important enough to matter. He was done being pushed. 25, 26, 27. He leaned down again. 2 more breaths. He watched her chest rise, fall, rise again. "Come on," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Come on, don't die like this. Not here, not now." 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The room had gone quiet behind him. The executives had stopped shouting. Even the hands that had been clawing at him had fallen away. They were watching now, watching a janitor fight for a billionaire's life, watching a man with nothing risk everything for a woman who did not even know his name. And then it happened. Vivian's chest jerked violently, her back arched. Her mouth opened in a desperate, gasping reflex that pulled air into lungs that had been empty for far too long. She coughed. Once, twice, 3 times. Her eyes flew open, wild and unfocused, seeing nothing and everything at once. Her fingers clawed at the marble floor. Her chest heaved with ragged, desperate breaths. She was alive. Garrett collapsed backward, his arms shaking his back, screaming, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He sat on the cold floor and watched the woman breathe, watched the color slowly return to her face, watched the blue fade from her lips. He had done it. He had saved her. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Executives swarmed around Vivian, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of concern and panic. Someone was calling for paramedics. Someone else was loosening her collar. A dozen hands reached for her, touched her, lifted her. None of them looked at Garrett. None of them thanked him. He sat alone on the marble floor, his uniform torn, his back bleeding where the blows had broken skin, his hands trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. He had just saved a woman's life, and already they were acting as if he did not exist. The paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. They burst through the boardroom doors with a stretcher and medical bags, their movements efficient and professional. Within seconds, they had Vivian on the stretcher, an oxygen mask over her face, an IV line running into her arm. One of them turned to the room. "Who started CPR?" he asked. Garrett raised his hand. His voice was weak, barely audible. "I did." The paramedic looked at him, really looked at him. Took in the gray uniform, the torn fabric, the blood seeping through the back of his shirt. "You saved her life," the paramedic said quietly. "Another 2 minutes without oxygen, and she would have had severe brain damage. Maybe worse." Garrett nodded. He did not know what to say. Before he could speak, a shadow fell over him. Harrison Cromwell stood there, his silver hair immaculate, his suit unwrinkled, his face twisted into an expression of pure contempt. He looked at Garrett the way a man might look at something he had scraped off his shoe. "What's your name?" Harrison demanded. "Garrett Brennan," he answered. "I'm a janitor. Night shift. 22nd floor." "You put your mouth on Ms. Harrington." It was not a question. It was an accusation. Garrett blinked. "She wasn't breathing. I performed CPR. I'll be reviewing the security footage personally." Harrison cut him off. "You need to leave this floor immediately. Do not return until you are contacted by human resources." Garrett's throat tightened. He looked around the room, searching for someone, anyone who might speak up for him, who might acknowledge what he had done. The executives avoided his eyes. The paramedics were focused on Vivian. No one said a word. Garrett bent down and picked up his mop with trembling hands. His back screamed in protest. His shoulder throbbed where the blows had landed, but he straightened his spine, lifted his chin, and walked out of the boardroom with as much dignity as he could muster. Behind him, the doors swung shut. And just like that, Garrett Brennan ceased to exist. That night, Garrett sat on the bus ride home with his shoulders hunched and his eyes fixed on nothing. The city lights blurred past the window. The other passengers talked and laughed and lived their lives completely unaware that a man in a torn gray uniform had saved a billionaire's life just hours ago. He did not tell anyone. He did not know how. When he got home, Lily was waiting at the door with her teddy bear clutched against her chest. She looked up at him with worried eyes. "You're late, Daddy," she said. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay, sweetheart," Garrett lied. "Just a crazy day at work." He made dinner. Reheated macaroni and cheese. Leftover vegetables from 2 days ago. Lily chattered about school and her butterfly costume and the boy in her class who always pulled her hair. Garrett nodded and smiled and said the right things. But his mind was somewhere else. It was back in that boardroom kneeling on cold marble, counting compressions, while the world screamed at him to stop. It was watching a woman's chest rise with the breath he had given her. It was feeling the blows land on his back and choosing to keep going anyway. He had done something good, something right, and they had treated him like a criminal. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep and Margaret had gone home, Garrett lay on his thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. The heater rattled in the corner. The walls were thin, and he could hear his neighbors arguing next door. Somewhere down the hall, Baby was crying. He pressed his hand against his back. The bruises were deep. They would hurt for weeks. But the pain in his body was nothing compared to the pain in his chest. He had saved a woman's life, and all they had seen was a poor janitor who dared to touch someone above his station. Garrett closed his eyes. He did not know that across the city in a penthouse overlooking the Philadelphia skyline, Vivian Harrington was waking up in a hospital bed with no memory of what had happened. He did not know that she would spend the next 3 days asking questions that no one would answer. He did not know that his life was about to change forever. For now, he was just a man with nothing. A father with a daughter he could barely provide for. A janitor who had been invisible his whole life, and who was about to be erased completely. The next morning came gray and cold. Garrett stood outside the Harrington Holdings Tower at 6 a.m., wearing the same uniform he had worn the day before. The blood stains had been scrubbed out as best he could manage. The tears had been sewn shut with thread borrowed from Margaret. He took a deep breath. He told himself it would be fine. Maybe they just wanted to ask him some questions. Maybe they wanted to thank him properly away from the chaos of yesterday. Maybe someone had finally realized that he had done nothing wrong. He walked toward the revolving door. A security guard stepped in front of him. "Sir, you can't enter." Garrett blinked. "What, I work here. Night shift, 22nd floor." The guard did not look at him. "I was instructed not to let you in." "Instructed by who?" "Look, there must be some mistake. I've been working here for 3 months. You can check with—" "Contact Human Resources," the guard said flatly. He turned away as if Garrett had already ceased to exist. Garrett stood frozen on the sidewalk. The morning rush swirled around him. Men and women in expensive suits walked past without seeing him. The November wind cut through his thin jacket like a knife. He felt like a ghost, invisible when he was working, and now invisible when he was not. He found a side entrance, convinced a sympathetic delivery driver to let him through. Made his way down to the service level where the cleaning staff kept their lockers. His supervisor was waiting for him. The man's name was Carl. He was 53 years old with a permanent frown and a paunch that hung over his belt. He had never been particularly kind to Garrett, but he had never been cruel either. Today his face was blank. "Brennan," Carl said, "wait here." Garrett waited in the narrow hallway next to the row of staff lockers. His name was still written on locker number 7 in messy black marker. Crooked, familiar. 10 minutes passed. Carl returned with a sealed envelope in his hand. "You're terminated," he said. The words hit Garrett like a physical blow. "Terminated? But why? What did I do?" Carl shrugged. HR says inappropriate conduct involving senior personnel. That's all I know. Inappropriate conduct, Garrett's voice rose. I saved her life. She wasn't breathing. I performed CPR. I don't know anything about that, Carl said. He held out the envelope. Your final paycheck's in there, no severance. Employment ended immediately. Garrett took the envelope with numb fingers. He opened it slowly as if moving too fast might make it real. Inside was a termination letter and a check for $214. The letter was brief, professional, final. Employment terminated effective immediately due to inappropriate conduct involving senior personnel. Garrett read the words 3 times. They did not change. He walked out of the building in a daze. The city moved around him, but he was not part of it anymore. Taxis honked. Pedestrians rushed past. Phones rang and voices chattered, and life continued as if nothing had happened. Garrett found a bus stop bench and sat down. His legs had given out. His phone buzzed. A text from a coworker. A screenshot of a group chat. "Did you see that janitor creep was all over Ms. Harrington when she passed out? Looked like he was kissing her." Another message appeared below it. "Disgusting. Was that assault?" Garrett's chest tightened. His phone buzzed again. Another screenshot. This one was a blurry still from the security camera. It showed him leaning over Vivian, his mouth pressed to hers. The moment he had given her breath. The moment he had saved her life. It had been turned into evidence of something vile. Garrett let the phone fall onto his thigh. He looked up. Across the street, a massive billboard showed Vivian Harrington smiling down at the city. The slogan beside her face read, "Integrity, Vision, Leadership." He felt sick. The days that followed were a slow descent into darkness. Garrett went from business to business looking for work. Laundromats, diners, cleaning services, warehouses. Anywhere that might hire a man with rough hands and a willingness to work. But everywhere the answer was the same. A hesitant look, a whispered conversation, a polite shake of the head. "Sorry, we're not hiring right now. We'll keep your application on file. Have you tried somewhere else?" The truth spread faster than Garrett could run from it. His name had become a rumor. His face had become a meme. Trashy websites ran headlines that made him want to vomit. Janitor couldn't keep his hands off Billionaire CEO. Crossing the line did a cleaning man assault Philadelphia's richest woman. Single dad or sexual predator. The disturbing story behind the viral CPR video. Garrett stopped reading after the third one. But the damage was done. At home, things grew worse. The electricity was cut off 3 days after his termination. Garrett came home to find Lily sitting in the dark, her teddy bear clutched against her chest, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy, the lights won't work," she said. "I know, sweetheart," Garrett answered. We're having some problems with the power company. It'll be fixed soon." Another lie. He had grown too good at telling them. Margaret did what she could. She brought over candles and flashlights. She cooked meals on her gas stove and carried them down the hall. She held Lily when Garrett was too exhausted to do anything but stare at the wall. But she was 68 years old. Her back was bad. Her pension barely covered her own needs. She could not save them. 1 week after Garrett was fired, he stopped eating. He told himself it was because there was not enough food. He told himself Lily needed it more than he did. He told himself he was fine that he had gone hungry before, that a few missed meals would not matter. But the truth was simpler and darker. He had stopped caring. The injustice had hollowed him out. The lies had poisoned him. The knowledge that he had done something good, something right, something heroic, and had been destroyed for it, that knowledge had broken something inside him that he did not know how to fix. He lay on his mattress for hours at a time. He did not answer his phone. He did not look for work. He just lay there, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, listening to the heater rattle, and the neighbors fight, and the city grind on without him. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, he would whisper to himself, the same words he had whispered in that boardroom. "Come on, don't die like this." But now he was not sure who he was talking to anymore. 10 days after Garrett saved Vivian Harrington's life, he collapsed. Lily found him on the floor of the tiny kitchen, unconscious, burning with fever. She screamed for Margaret. The old woman came running, took one look at Garrett's gray face and called for an ambulance. But they were poor, and ambulances cost money they did not have. So Margaret did the only thing she could think of. She called the number on a business card that Lily had found in Garrett's pocket. A card with the Harrington Holdings logo on one side and a handwritten phone number on the other. Across the city in a penthouse 43 floors above the street, Vivian Harrington was staring at a video on her laptop. She had been watching it for 3 hours. On the screen, she saw herself collapse. She saw the executives freeze. She saw a man in a gray uniform push through the doors and drop to his knees beside her. She watched him breathe life into her lungs. She watched him fight to restart her heart. She watched him take blow after blow to his back and shoulders and never once stop trying to save her. And then she watched Harrison Cromwell drag him away like garbage. Vivian's hands were shaking. Her phone rang. She answered without looking at the screen. Mr. Harrington. The voice was old, trembling, unfamiliar. My name is Margaret Sullivan. You don't know me, but I know the man who saved your life. His name is Garrett Brennan, and I think he's dying. Vivian was on her feet before the woman finished speaking. Give me the address, she said. And for the first time in 10 years, Vivian Harrington ran. Vivian Harrington had not driven herself anywhere in 7 years. She had drivers for that, assistants, people whose entire job was to ensure that she never had to think about traffic or parking or the mundane mechanics of getting from one place to another. But tonight she was behind the wheel of her black Mercedes, tearing through the streets of Philadelphia like a woman possessed. The address Margaret Sullivan had given her was in West Philadelphia, a neighborhood Vivian had never visited, a world she had never seen. She punched it into her GPS and watched the estimated arrival time tick upward as traffic thickened around her. 23 minutes. Too long. She pressed harder on the accelerator. The city changed as she drove west. The glass towers of Center City gave way to older buildings, brick and stone and faded paint. The streets grew narrower. The sidewalks grew emptier. The lights in the windows grew dimmer. Vivian had built her empire in Philadelphia. She had lived here for 20 years. And yet, as she drove deeper into West Philadelphia, she realized she had never truly seen this city at all. She had seen the parts that mattered to her business: the financial district, the shipping yards, the warehouses and distribution centers that formed the backbone of her logistics network. But this was something else entirely. Boarded up storefronts, crumbling apartment buildings, men huddled on corners, their breath fogging in the November cold. Children playing in empty lots strewn with broken glass and rusted metal. This was poverty, real poverty, the kind that did not show up in quarterly reports or earnings calls, the kind that existed in the shadows of her gleaming towers, invisible and ignored. Vivian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She had always told herself that she had earned everything she had, that her success was the result of hard work and determination and sacrifice, that anyone could achieve what she had achieved if they were willing to fight for it. But looking at these streets, these buildings, these people, she wondered for the first time if that was true, or if she had simply been lucky enough to start from a place where fighting was still possible. The GPS directed her to a low brown building on a street with no name. The paint was peeling. The metal staircase was rusted. The windows were dark, some of them covered with plastic sheeting instead of glass. Vivian parked her Mercedes at the curb and stepped out into the cold. She was still wearing her cashmere coat and her Italian leather boots. She had not thought to change. She had not thought about anything except getting here as fast as possible. Now standing on this broken sidewalk, she felt absurdly out of place, like a diamond dropped in a pile of coal. She walked to the entrance and climbed the stairs. The hallway inside smelled of mildew and cooking grease and something else, something sour and desperate that she could not name. The lights flickered overhead. The carpet beneath her feet was stained and worn. She found the apartment number Margaret had given her and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. A little girl stood in the doorway. She was 8 years old, maybe 9, thin and pale with tangled brown hair and eyes that were too old for her face. She wore a t-shirt that was too thin for the weather and clutched a ragged teddy bear against her chest. "Are you the lady from the phone?" the girl asked. Vivian nodded. "I'm looking for Garrett Brennan. Is he here?" The girl's face crumpled. "He's sick," she whispered. "He's really, really sick. I tried to make him soup. I tried to give him water, but he won't wake up. He just keeps talking in his sleep. Counting. Always counting." Vivian's blood went cold. "Show me," she said. The apartment was tiny. 2 rooms, a kitchen barely large enough to turn around in, a bathroom with a cracked mirror, and a toilet that ran constantly. Walls that had once been white, but had faded to a dingy gray. No lights. The electricity had been cut off. Candles flickered on every surface, casting dancing shadows across the peeling wallpaper. In the corner of the main room, on a thin mattress pushed against the wall, a man lay motionless beneath 2 worn blankets. Garrett Brennan. Vivian crossed the room and knelt beside him. His face was gaunt. His cheeks were hollow. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that reminded her with sickening clarity of her own face in the boardroom video. She pressed her hand to his forehead. He was burning. "Garrett," she said. "Garrett, can you hear me?" No response. His lips moved, his head twitched, but his eyes stayed closed. She leaned closer, trying to hear what he was saying. 15, 16, 17. He was counting. Even now, unconscious and dying, he was counting compressions. He was still trying to save her. Vivian pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "I need an ambulance immediately." Adult male, mid-30s, high fever, unresponsive. "The address is..." She gave the address, she gave her name. She gave every piece of information they asked for, her voice steady even as her hands shook. When she hung up, she turned to find the little girl watching her from the doorway. "Is my daddy going to die?" Lily asked. Vivian's heart cracked. She crossed the room and knelt in front of the child. She took Lily's small hands in her own and looked into those frightened eyes. "No," she said. "No, he is not going to die. Do you know why?" Lily shook her head. "Because your daddy saved my life. He fought for me when no one else would. And now I am going to fight for him. Do you understand?" Lily nodded slowly. Her lower lip trembled, but she did not cry. She was brave, just like her father. An elderly woman appeared in the doorway. She was 68 years old with white hair and a face lined with worry. She moved slowly, leaning on the doorframe for support. "You came," Margaret Sullivan said. "I wasn't sure you would." "How long has he been like this?" Vivian asked. 3 days, maybe 4. He stopped eating a week ago, said Lily needed the food more than he did. Then he stopped getting out of bed. Then he stopped talking." Margaret's voice cracked. "He's a good man, Ms. Harrington. The best man I've ever known, and they destroyed him for saving your life." The words hit Vivian like a slap. She deserved them. She deserved worse. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later. Paramedics rushed into the tiny apartment with equipment and stretchers. They checked Garrett's vitals, started an IV, lifted him onto the gurney with practiced efficiency. "Severe dehydration," one of them said. "Fever of 104, signs of malnutrition. His body is shutting down." "Will he survive?" Vivian asked. The paramedic hesitated. "We'll do everything we can." It was not an answer, but it was all she was going to get. Vivian climbed into the ambulance without asking permission. No one stopped her. She sat on the narrow bench beside the gurney and watched the paramedics work. They hung IV bags and checked monitors and spoke to each other in clipped medical jargon that she only half understood. She reached out and took Garrett's hand. It was rough, calloused. The hand of a man who had worked hard his entire life. The hand that had pressed against her chest and forced her heart to beat. The hand that had given her breath when her lungs had forgotten how. She held it gently as if it were something precious. Because it was. The ambulance screamed through the city. Vivian watched Garrett's face, the flickering of his eyelids, the movement of his lips as he continued to count in his sleep. She thought about the video she had watched. She thought about the moment he had burst through those boardroom doors, the way he had dropped everything and run toward her without hesitation, the way he had ignored the shouting and the accusations and the blows raining down on his back. He had not known her. He had not owed her anything. He was just a janitor, a single father, a man at the bottom of a system that had never given him anything but hardship. And yet when she was dying, he had been the only one willing to fight. Not Harrison Cromwell with his 7-figure salary in his corner office, not the board of directors with their stock options and their golden parachutes. Not any of the people who claimed to respect her, to admire her, to value her leadership. Just him, a man with nothing, a man who had given her everything, and she had let them destroy him for it. The hospital was one of the best in the city. Vivian had called ahead. She had made arrangements. She had done the only thing she knew how to do, thrown money at the problem until it started to move. Garrett was rushed into the emergency department. A team of doctors and nurses took over, pushing him through double doors that swung shut behind them like the closing of a verdict. Vivian stood in the hallway and watched him disappear. Then she found a chair and sat down and waited. The hours passed slowly. Vivian did not move. She sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair and stared at the doors and thought about everything she had allowed to happen. She had not ordered Garrett's termination. She had not written the lies that destroyed his reputation. She had not personally orchestrated his ruin. But she had allowed it. She had been so focused on her own recovery, so consumed by the shock of her near-death experience, that she had not asked the questions she should have asked. Who saved me? What happened to him? Is he all right? She had trusted her executives to handle the situation. She had trusted Harrison Cromwell to do the right thing. She had trusted the system she had built to function with integrity and fairness. And the system had failed. No, that was not quite right. The system had not failed. The system had worked exactly as it was designed to work. It had protected the powerful. It had silenced the inconvenient. It had erased the man who did not fit. And Vivian had built that system, every policy, every procedure, every chain of command that allowed a CFO to fire a janitor without oversight or accountability. She had created all of it, and now she was seeing for the first time what her creation had become. A doctor appeared 3 hours later. He was young, maybe 35, with tired eyes and a clipboard in his hands. "Ms. Harrington." Vivian stood. "How is he stable?" the doctor said. "Barely. He was severely dehydrated. Malnourished, his immune system had essentially collapsed from prolonged stress. Another day, maybe two, and we would have lost him." Vivian's legs went weak. She sat back down. "He's going to need rest," the doctor continued. "Fluids, proper nutrition, and honestly, he's going to need someone to watch over him. From what I can tell, this man has been carrying an impossible burden for a very long time." His body finally gave out. "Can I see him on?" The doctor nodded. "He's sleeping now, but you can sit with him if you'd like. Room 412. Vivian was already walking. Room 412 was small and quiet. Garrett lay in the bed, an oxygen tube beneath his nose, an IV dripping steadily into his arm. The monitors beside him beeped softly, tracking his heartbeat, his blood pressure, the rhythm of his breathing. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The man who had burst into that boardroom with such fierce determination, who had fought to save her life, while the world tried to stop him, now looked like a shell, a husk, something that had been emptied out and left behind. Vivienne pulled a chair to his bedside and sat down. She did not leave. Night fell outside the hospital windows. The city lights glittered in the distance. Traffic flowed along the highways like rivers of light. Somewhere out there, millions of people were living their lives, completely unaware of the man in this room or the woman sitting beside him. Vivienne watched Garrett sleep. She thought about Lily, the little girl with the two old eyes and the ragged teddy bear. She had arranged for Margaret to bring her to the hospital, had set them up in a private waiting room with food and blankets and a television to distract them. But she knew that was not enough. Lily needed her father, and her father had almost died because of a system that Vivian had built and failed to control. Around midnight, Vivian's phone buzzed. A text from Olivia Pemberton, her legal assistant. "Harrison Cromwell has been asking questions. Wants to know where you are. Should I tell him?" Vivian typed back no. She turned off her phone and put it in her pocket. Harrison could wait. Everything could wait. Garrett stirred just before dawn. Vivian had been dozing in the chair, her head tilted back against the wall when she heard him groan. She snapped awake instantly. His eyes were open. They were unfocused at first, drifting around the room without settling on anything. Then they found her face and stopped. "Where am I?" he asked. His voice was a rasp, barely audible. "You're in the hospital," Vivian said. "You collapsed. Your neighbor called me." Garrett blinked. He seemed to be struggling to process her presence, to make sense of why she was here in this room, sitting beside his bed. "You," he swallowed hard. "You're Vivian Harrington." "Yes." "Why are you here?" It was the same question she had been asking herself all night. She leaned forward. "Because I watched the video," she said. "All of it, every second. I saw what you did for me. I saw how they treated you, and I saw what happened after." Garrett's eyes flickered. Something dark passed across his face. "Then you know," he said quietly. "You know what they did." "Yes." "They said I assaulted you. They said I—" He stopped. His voice had broken. He turned his face away. Vivian reached out and took his hand. "I know what they said," she told him, "and I know it was a lie. You saved my life, Garrett. You performed CPR when no one else would move. You took beatings and kept going. You gave me breath when my lungs had stopped working." She squeezed his hand. and they destroyed you for it, under my name, in my company, using systems that I built and failed to oversee. Garrett turned back to look at her. His eyes were wet. Why didn't you stop them? The question cut deeper than any accusation. Because I didn't know, Vivian said. Because I was recovering from cardiac arrest and I trusted the wrong people to handle things in my absence. Because I asked questions and they gave me answers that I was too tired and too scared to challenge. She took a breath. None of that is an excuse. I should have known. I should have demanded the truth. I should have protected you the moment I was able to think clearly. But I didn't. And I am more sorry for today than I have ever been sorry for anything in my life. Garrett was silent for a long moment. The monitors beeped softly. The first light of dawn crept through the window. They took everything from me, he said finally. My job, my reputation, my ability to provide for my daughter. I've been a janitor my whole life, Miss Harrington. I've always been invisible, but I never minded that. I just wanted to do my work and take care of Lily. He met her eyes. But they didn't just make me invisible. They made me a monster. They turned the best thing I ever did into evidence of something vile. And no one believed me. No one would even listen. I'm listening now, Vivian said. Why do you care? She considered the question. Because when I was dying on that floor, you were the only person who did anything. Because you risked everything to save a woman you had never met. Because you showed me what courage looks like. And I have spent my entire career thinking I knew what courage was. She leaned closer. I built an empire, Garrett. I made billions of dollars. I put my name on buildings and my face on magazine covers. And in the moment that mattered most, I was saved by a man who cleans floors for a living. A man who had every reason to walk away and chose to fight instead. Her voice softened. That means something. And I refuse to let the world forget it. Garrett was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke. My daughter, he said. Lily, is she? She's here, Vivian assured him. She's safe, your neighbor's with her. I've made sure they have everything they need. Relief flooded Garrett's face. For a moment, he looked like he might cry. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me yet, Vivian said. I have a lot more to make up for. The next few days passed in a blur of medical checkups and difficult conversations. Garrett's condition improved steadily. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. His body was recovering, even if his spirit remained fragile. Vivian came every day. She brought food. She brought books. She brought updates from her legal team about the steps she was taking to clear his name. She brought Lily. The little girl would climb onto her father's bed and curl up beside him, her teddy bear wedged between them, and tell him about everything she had seen and done since he had been in the hospital. Ms. Harrington let me have ice cream, Lily reported one afternoon. 3 scoops. And she said I could call her Vivian, but that seems weird because she's fancy. Garrett laughed. It was the first time Vivian had heard him laugh. The sound made something warm bloom in her chest. On the 4th day, Vivian brought a document. She sat beside Garrett's bed and handed it to him. What is this? He asked. An official statement, she said, signed and notarized under my name. It declares that your actions on the day of my cardiac arrest were emergency medical intervention life-saving and entirely appropriate under the circumstances. No misconduct, no violation of any policy, complete exoneration. Garrett stared at the paper. This will clear my name. It's a start. My legal team is also preparing a defamation case against the outlets that ran those stories about you. We're going to make sure everyone knows the truth. Garrett looked up at her. His eyes were searching. Why are you doing all this? Because it's right, Vivian said simply. And because I owe you a debt I can never fully repay. She hesitated. There's something else. When you're ready, when you've recovered, I want to offer you a job. A job. I'm creating a new department at Harrington Holdings, Employee Welfare and Advocacy. Its purpose will be to ensure that no one ever falls through the cracks the way you did. To give a voice to the people who are usually ignored. She met his eyes. I want you to lead it. Garrett's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I'm a janitor, and he said, I don't have qualifications for something like that. You have something better, Vivian replied. You have experience. You know what it feels like to be treated as invisible. You know the failures in the system because you've lived them. That makes you more qualified than anyone with a degree. She leaned back. Think about it. There's no pressure, but the offer stands whenever you're ready. That night in a dim office across the city, Harrison Cromwell sat alone. A glass of bourbon sweated on the desk in front of him. His phone glowed with a news alert he had already read 3 times. Vivian Harrington visits West Philadelphia Hospital. Sources say she's been there for days. He picked up the phone and dialed a number. "It's Cromwell," he said when the line connected. "I need information. Everything you can find on a man named Garrett Brennan, old records, sealed files, anything that might have been buried." A pause. "I don't care what it costs, just find it, and find it fast." He hung up and stared out the window at the city lights. The janitor had become a problem, and Harrison Cromwell had built his entire career on solving problems. 3 days later, a manila envelope arrived at Harrison's office. He opened it with steady hands and spread the contents across his desk. Police reports, court documents, school records, a juvenile arrest from 18 years ago, a 16-year-old boy caught stealing cough medicine from a pharmacy. The reason buried in a social worker's notes: his mother was dying of pneumonia and they couldn't afford her medication. The charges had been dropped. The record had been sealed. But nothing was ever truly erased. Harrison smiled. He picked up his phone and dialed a reporter he had worked with before, a man who understood that access to power came with certain obligations. "I have a story for you," Harrison said, "about the janitor everyone's been talking about, the one Vivian Harrington has been visiting in the hospital." He slid the documents across his desk. "Turns out he's not quite the hero everyone thinks he is." The new apartment was nothing like the old one. Vivian had chosen it herself, a 3-bedroom unit in a quiet neighborhood just outside Center City. Clean walls, working heat, windows that let in actual sunlight instead of filtering it through plastic sheeting and despair. She stood in the doorway and watched Garrett walk through the space for the first time. He moved slowly, still weak from his days in the hospital, but there was something different in his posture now. His shoulders were not quite so hunched. His eyes were not quite so hollow. Behind him, Lily exploded into the apartment like a small hurricane. "Daddy, look!" she shrieked. "There's a bathtub, a real bathtub, and it has hot water." "I checked," Garrett laughed. The sound was still fragile, but it was real. Margaret Sullivan shuffled in behind them, leaning on her new walker. The hospital had fitted her for it during the comprehensive medical checkup Vivian had arranged. Her arthritis was being treated now. Her blood pressure was under control. For the first time in years, she was not in constant pain. "Lord have mercy," Margaret muttered, looking around. "This place is nicer than anywhere I've lived in my entire life." Vivian smiled. "The lease is paid for 1 year. After that, we'll reassess based on circumstances." Garrett turned to face her. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. "Then don't," Vivian replied. "Not yet. We still have work to do." The first blow came 3 days later. Vivian was in her office when Olivia Pemberton rushed in, her face pale. "You need to see this," Olivia said, sliding a tablet across the desk. Vivian looked down at the screen. The headline hit her like a punch to the stomach. "Hero or Criminal: The Dark Past of the Janitor Who Saved Vivian Harrington." Below the headline was a photograph of Garrett. It was old, grainy, clearly pulled from some archived database. He looked younger, frightened, the kind of photograph taken in a police station. Vivian read the article with growing horror. It detailed Garrett's arrest at 16 for stealing medication. It mentioned his dropped-out college education. It listed his debts, his evictions, his failed marriage. It painted a picture of a man who was not a hero at all, but a chronic failure, a manipulator, someone who had seen an opportunity in Vivian's collapse and seized it for personal gain. The article did not mention that he had saved her life. It did not mention the CPR, the beatings he had endured, the courage he had shown. It mentioned only the things that made him look small. Vivian set down the tablet. "Who wrote this?" "A reporter named Douglas Whitfield. He's known for hit pieces. Someone fed him this information." "Someone." Vivian's voice was flat, cold. She already knew who. The story spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was everywhere. News sites, social media, television broadcasts. Everyone was talking about the janitor with the criminal past, the man who had somehow wormed his way into Vivian Harrington's good graces. The comments sections were brutal. Knew there was something off about that guy. Classic con artist. Saw a rich woman in trouble and made his move. Vivian Harrington is being manipulated. Someone needs to protect her from this predator. Vivian read them all, every single one, and with each word her anger grew. The shareholders called an emergency meeting. Vivian sat at the head of the conference table, the same table where she had collapsed just weeks ago, and listened to men in expensive suits tell her what she should do. The optics are terrible, one of them said. His name was Richard Eastwood. He owned 12% of the company. This story is all over the news. Our stock dropped 2 points this morning. 2 points, Vivian repeated. It could get worse, much worse. If you continue to associate yourself with this man, it sends the wrong message. It makes the company look foolish. It makes you look foolish. What do you suggest I do? Eastwood leaned forward. Distance yourself publicly. Issue a statement saying that you were grateful for his assistance during your medical emergency, but that your subsequent involvement was based on incomplete information. Now that the full picture has emerged, you've decided to sever ties. Sever ties, Vivian said slowly. It's the smart play. The market will respond positively. The story will die down. In a month, no one will even remember his name. Vivian looked around the table. 12 faces looked back at her. 12 people who had been in this very room when she collapsed. 12 people who had stood frozen while she died. Tell me something, she said. When I was lying on this floor, not breathing, my heart stopped, my lips turning blue, which of you moved to help me? Silence. Which of you knelt beside me and performed CPR? Which of you took blows to the back and kept going? Which of you gave me breath when my lungs had forgotten how to work? More silence. None of you, Vivian answered her own question. Not a single one. You stood there like statues while a janitor saved my life. And now you want me to throw him away because his past makes you uncomfortable. She stood. This meeting is over. Harrison Cromwell was waiting for her in the hallway. He fell into step beside her as she walked toward the elevator. Vivian, I understand you're upset, he said smoothly, but you need to think about this rationally. The board has a point. This man's history raises serious questions about his character. Does it? A criminal record, failed relationships, chronic financial problems. These are not the marks of a stable individual. Vivian stopped walking. She turned to face Harrison. He was taller than her, broader. He had 30 years of corporate experience and a network of connections that stretched across the entire eastern seaboard. But in this moment, he looked small. Let me ask you something, Harrison. Where did that reporter get his information? Harrison's expression did not change. I have no idea what you mean. Garrett's juvenile record was sealed. His financial records are private. Someone with significant resources had to dig all of that up and hand it to the press. Perhaps he has enemies we don't know about. Perhaps. Vivian stepped closer. But I don't think so. I think someone in this company wanted to destroy him. I think that same someone orchestrated his termination, spread lies about him, and is now trying to finish the job by poisoning public opinion. She met Harrison's eyes. I think that someone is you. For a moment, something flickered in Harrison's face. A crack in the mask, a glimpse of the calculation beneath. Then it was gone. That's a serious accusation, he said quietly. I hope you have evidence to support it. I'm working on it. She walked away. Behind her, Harrison Cromwell watched her go. His jaw was tight. His hands were clenched. The war had begun. That night, Vivian sat alone in her penthouse. The city sprawled beneath her, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness. She had built so much, achieved so much, sacrificed so much. And now she stood at a crossroads. One path was easy. Distance herself from Garrett. Let the story die. Protect her company, her reputation, her empire. The other path was hard. Stand by a man the world had decided to hate. Fight for justice in a system designed to crush people like him. Risk everything she had built for someone who had nothing. Vivian closed her eyes. She thought about the boardroom, the moment she collapsed, the faces frozen in fear and calculation. And then the doors bursting open. A man in a gray uniform, rough hands on her chest, a voice counting compressions. Come on, don't die like this. He had not hesitated. He had not calculated the risks. He had simply acted. Because it was right. Vivian opened her eyes. She knew what she had to do. The press conference was held 3 days later. Vivian had chosen the venue carefully, the main lobby of Harrington Holdings Tower, the same building where Garrett had worked as a janitor, the same building where his life had been destroyed. Journalists packed the space. Cameras flashed. Microphones bristled like weapons. Vivian stepped up to the podium. She was wearing a simple black dress. No jewelry except her wedding ring, which she had never removed even after Richard's death. Her hair was down softer than her usual severe style. She looked human, vulnerable, real. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I have a statement to make, and then I will take questions." The room fell silent. 3 weeks ago, I suffered a sudden cardiac arrest during a board meeting. My heart stopped. I was not breathing. I was by every medical definition dying. She paused. In that room were 12 of my most senior executives. Men and women I have worked with for years, people I trusted. Not one of them moved to help me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The person who saved my life was a janitor named Garrett Brennan. He was working in the hallway outside. When he heard the commotion, he ran in and performed CPR. He gave me breath. He kept my heart beating. He did this while being physically attacked by members of my own staff who thought he had no right to touch me. Vivian's voice hardened. After I was taken to the hospital, Garrett Brennan was fired. He was accused of inappropriate conduct. His actions were deliberately misrepresented. His reputation was destroyed. He lost his job, his income, his ability to provide for his 8-year-old daughter. She looked directly into the cameras. This was done under my name, in my company, by people I trusted, and I am here today to set the record straight. She pressed a button on the podium. Behind her, a massive screen flickered to life. The security footage began to play. The room watched in silence. They saw Vivian collapse. They saw the executives freeze. They saw Garrett burst through the doors and drop to his knees. They saw him perform CPR while Harrison Cromwell struck him with an umbrella. They saw him take blow after blow and never stop counting. They saw him give breath to a dying woman while the most powerful people in the room stood by and watched. When the video ended, Vivian spoke again. "This man saved my life, and we repaid him by destroying his. That ends today." She held up a document. "This is a formal statement clearing Garrett Brennan of all accusations. His termination has been reversed. His record has been expunged. He will receive full back pay plus damages for the suffering he has endured." She set down the document. But that is not enough, because this was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate campaign to silence and destroy a man who did nothing wrong. She turned to face a section of the crowd. Harrison Cromwell stood there, his face pale. Harrison Cromwell orchestrated Garrett Brennan's termination. He ordered the falsification of records. He leaked sealed juvenile files to the press. He used his position in this company to destroy an innocent man. The room exploded. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Harrison tried to push toward the exit, but security guards blocked his path. Harrison Cromwell is terminated from Harrington Holdings effective immediately. Vivian continued over the chaos. "I am also referring his actions to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation." She looked directly at Harrison. "You once asked me if I had evidence. I do now." Harrison's face twisted with rage, but there was nothing he could do. The trap had closed. Garrett watched the press conference from the new apartment. Lily sat beside him on the couch, not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing its importance. Margaret stood in the kitchen doorway, tears streaming down her weathered face. On the screen, Vivian Harrington was dismantling the system that had destroyed him, word by word, fact by fact, truth by truth. When the cameras cut away to shots of Harrison being escorted out by security, Garrett let out a breath he had been holding for weeks. "Daddy," Lily tugged at his sleeve, "does this mean the bad people can't hurt you anymore?" Garrett pulled her close. "Yeah, baby," he whispered. "I think it does." But Vivian was not finished. She had one more card to play. "Before I take questions," she said, "I'd like to invite someone to speak. The man at the center of this story. The man who saved my life." The doors at the back of the lobby opened. Garrett Brennan walked in. He was wearing a new suit, simple, dark. It fit him well, but he still moved like a janitor, careful, humble, aware of the space he occupied and the people around him. The cameras swiveled toward him. He walked to the podium. Vivian stepped aside. Garrett looked out at the sea of faces, the lights, the microphones, everything he had never imagined being part of. He cleared his throat. "My name is Garrett Brennan," he said. "I'm 34 years old. I'm a single father. And until a few weeks ago, I was a janitor at this building." His voice was steady, rough, real. "You've heard a lot about me lately. Some of it true, some of it not. So let me tell you the truth." He gripped the podium. "When I was 16, I stole cough medicine from a pharmacy. My mother was dying of pneumonia. We couldn't afford her medication. I was desperate and scared, and I made a choice that got me arrested." He paused. The charges were dropped. The record was sealed. But it happened. It's part of who I am. He looked into the cameras. "I've been poor my whole life. I've been behind on rent more times than I can count. I've worked jobs that nobody notices. I've been invisible." His voice cracked slightly. "But I've never hurt anyone. I've never taken advantage of anyone. I've just tried to take care of my daughter and do my job and survive." He straightened. "When I saw Ms. Harrington on that floor, I didn't think about who she was. I didn't think about what it might mean for me. I just saw someone dying, and I knew how to help, so I helped." He looked at Vivian. "She didn't owe me anything for that. No one owes anyone anything for doing what's right. But she chose to fight for me anyway. She chose to see me when everyone else looked away." He turned back to the crowd. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who did what anyone should have done. The real hero is the woman who had the courage to stand up and tell the truth." He stepped back from the podium. The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. One person at first, then two, then 10, then 100. The applause built like a wave crashing through the lobby, echoing off the marble walls, filling every corner of the building where Garrett Brennan had once mopped floors in silence. 6 months later, the National Conference on Labor Rights and Dignity was held in a convention center in downtown Philadelphia. Over 2,000 people filled the auditorium. Union leaders, academics, journalists, politicians, workers from every industry gathered to discuss the rights of those who were too often forgotten. Vivian Harrington stood at the podium. She looked different now. Not softer exactly, but more open, more human. The armor she had worn for so many years had developed cracks, and light was finally getting through. "6 months ago," she said, "I almost died. My heart stopped in the middle of a business meeting, and I was saved by a man who cleaned floors for a living." She smiled. "That experience changed me. It forced me to look at the company I had built and ask hard questions about who it served and who it failed." She gestured to a screen behind her. Statistics appeared, charts, numbers. "The Employee Welfare Initiative at Harrington Holdings has been operational for 5 months. In that time, we have reviewed over 200 complaints from workers who felt they had nowhere else to turn. We have terminated 7 managers for abuse of power. We have promoted 12 employees who were being held back by unfair evaluations. We have provided emergency assistance to 43 families facing housing or medical crises." She paused. "These are not just numbers. These are lives. Real people who were seen for the first time by a system that had ignored them." She turned toward the wings of the stage. "The man who runs this program is the same man who saved my life. Please welcome Garrett Brennan, Director of Employee Welfare and Advocacy at Harrington Holdings." Garrett walked onto the stage. He was wearing a better suit now. He had gained weight. He looked healthy, strong. But he still had that same humble walk, that same careful awareness of the space around him. The audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous. Garrett shook Vivian's hand, then stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you," he said. "I don't have a fancy speech prepared. I'm not very good at those." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "But I can tell you this. For most of my life, I was invisible. I cleaned buildings that people walked through without seeing me. I worked shifts that ended after everyone else had gone home. I existed in the spaces between the places nobody looks." He looked out at the audience. "But I wasn't alone. There are millions of people like me. People who do the work that keeps this country running. People who never get thanked, never get noticed, never get a seat at the table." His voice strengthened. "This program isn't about me. It's about them. It's about creating systems that see people, that listen to them, that treat them with the dignity they deserve. He gripped the podium. I used to think that being invisible meant I didn't matter, but I've learned something different. Being invisible just means that no one has chosen to look yet. And once someone does, once someone really sees you, everything changes. He turned to Vivian. Miss Harrington saw me. She fought for me. She gave me a chance to fight for others. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure that chance means something. He stepped back. The applause returned even louder than before. After the conference, there was a reception. Vivian stood by a window watching the crowd mingle. She held a glass of wine she had barely touched. Garrett found her there. You should be out there, she said. This is your moment. I've had enough moments for one day, Garrett replied. He stood beside her, looking out at the city. I wanted to thank you, properly, for everything. Vivian shook her head. You saved my life. Nothing I've done comes close to repaying that. It's not about repaying, Garrett turned to face her. It's about what you chose to do when you didn't have to do anything. You could have walked away. You could have believed the lies. You could have protected your company and let me disappear. He met her eyes. But you didn't. You chose to see me. And that made all the difference. Vivian was quiet for a moment. I almost didn't, she admitted, when the board pressured me to distance myself, when the stories came out, when everything seemed to be falling apart. I almost took the easy path. What stopped you? I thought about you, kneeling on that floor, taking those hits, never stopping. She smiled slightly. I realized that if a janitor could be that brave, the least I could do was try to match it. Garrett laughed softly. We make a strange team. The best ones usually are. Outside the reception hall in a quiet corner of the convention center, Lily Brennan sat on a bench with her teddy bear. She was wearing a new dress. Her hair had been brushed until it shone. She looked like a different child from the frightened girl who had opened the door to Vivian months ago. Margaret Sullivan sat beside her, watching the crowd through the glass doors. Your daddy did good today. Margaret said, I know. Lily replied, he always does good. People just didn't see it before. And now they do. Lily nodded seriously. Miss Vivian made them see. Margaret smiled and pulled the girl close. That she did, baby, that she did. Later that night, Garrett and Lily stood on the balcony of their apartment. The city lights spread out beneath them like a constellation brought down to earth. The air was cool, but not cold. Spring was coming. Daddy, Lily asked. Yeah, sweetheart. Are you happy now? Garrett looked down at his daughter, at her bright eyes, her hopeful face, her absolute certainty that the world could be good if people just tried hard enough. He thought about everything they had been through, the poverty, the hunger, the despair, the moment he had knelt beside a dying woman and chosen to fight. He thought about Vivian Harrington, the woman who had seen him, who had fought for him, who had given him a chance to become something more than invisible. He thought about all the people he would help in the years to come, the workers who would finally be heard, the families who would finally be supported, the invisible ones who would finally be seen. Yeah, baby, he said, pulling her into his arms. For the first time in my life, I think I really am. They stood there together, father and daughter, looking out at the breathing city. And somewhere across that city, in a penthouse high above the streets, Vivian Harrington stood at her own window. She was not looking at the buildings or the lights or the empire she had built. She was looking at something else, something she had almost lost and only recently found again. Her reflection. And for the first time in years, she recognized the woman looking back. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the icon on magazine covers. Just a human being, one who had been given a second chance, and who had chosen finally to use it well. The story of Garrett Brennan and Vivian Harrington reminds us that courage does not require wealth or status or power. Sometimes courage is simply choosing to act when everyone else stands still. Sometimes it is seeing someone the world has decided to ignore. Sometimes it is fighting for justice even when the cost is everything you have built. The measure of a person is not found in their past mistakes or their present circumstances. It is found in the choices they make when those choices matter most. Garrett Brennan chose to save a life. Vivian Harrington chose to save a man. And together they proved that even in a world designed to keep people invisible, the human heart can still find its way to the light.